This event, in my opinion, is a highlight of the academic year, as the person invited to give the invited faculty lecture is chosen by both faculty and students. And the scholarship presented is always thought-provoking and enlightening. And in today's case, this is the second time a faculty member has been chosen to present. Not many of us can claim that honor. When Dr. Zajack first joined our faculty in 2010, I was so curious what this industrial organizational psychologist who spent time in the real world as a business analyst and consultant would bring to our campus. Over the years, one of the most consistent perspectives that Mark has offered is that sometimes less is more. Dr. Zajack.
Thank you, Dr. Furr. Thank you to the Hastings College Lecture Series Committee for inviting me to speak. Thank you to the faculty and students for voting for me as a speaker last year. I always enjoy this day where there's a faculty invited lecture. I'll say I really enjoy it from your perspective quite a bit. From this perspective, it's a little more daunting, but hopefully we can all learn something today. And so let's start off. For those of you who like an agenda, here's an agenda. Here's what we're going to talk about today. Look at the choices that we make on a daily basis. Why do we do what we do? Why did you choose to come here today? Maybe you were required to by a professor, but what's underlying those choices, and then whether those choices affect our well-being, whether they have a positive effect on our well-being, whether those choices, we can make them optimized to be more productive, and hopefully I'll offer you by the end of today some shortcuts for decision-making, some shortcuts for well-being and productivity. So let's examine why we do what we do. Most of you in this room are college students. You've chosen to go to college. Have you thought about why you're going to college? Sure. Probably your first answer would be to get a job so that I can make some money, so that I can live. I might need to make money and eat in order to live. But what's really underlying those decisions? What is truly driving you to do what you want to do? And can you get the most out of your college experience? So theoretically, we're acting in ways that would help our future selves. We want to make choices that would be in the best interest of our future self. Our momentary evaluations last about 7 seconds. Our present moment is about 7 seconds long. And then, should we be dedicating our time to our pleasure in those 7 seconds, or should we be dedicating our time to what we could potentially do in the future? So again, we want our choices to lead to well-being. We want our choices to lead to productivity and creativity in the future. And how can we orient ourselves to do that? So here's our theoretical model. Some of you know me well, know that I like statistics, I like numbers. So in theory, this would be how we'd make our choices about the future. Let's say you're considering being a doctor, going to medical school. What's the subjective value you would place on going to medical school? And what's the probability that you would succeed in college, apply for medical school, get into medical school, become a doctor, and you multiply that probability by how much you value that future role, and that gives you an expected utility. That would essentially give you an estimate of what you might enjoy doing in the future. If you're comparing that to going to law school, maybe you compare that to the probability you pass the bar. So I ask you, is that how we make decisions? Do you sit down with a piece of paper and do some math and rate your subjective value of A versus choice B and calculate probability? And it's clearly not. This is more how we make decisions. We're sitting there, maybe thinking this is what I should be doing, and instead, lots of distractions are calling to us. So how we actually make decisions in the present moment depends on our surroundings, depends on the people around us, depends on what is coming through on our email, on our smartphone, and is there anything new, bright, and shiny in the world that I can look at? Is there something in motion? Those things might distract us from making those choices. So how distracted are we? We could depend on some survey data to find out if we're distracted, if we are dedicating time in a way that we really think that we want to. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. Department of Bureau of Labor Statistics, does an American Time survey. A representative sample of Americans is surveyed, and they're asked about what they've done in the last 24 hours as representative of what Americans are doing. So 95% of people find some time to engage in a leisure activity. Great, you're doing things that not only you have to do, but you want to do. But only 17% of people reported taking the time to just sit and relax, to sit and think. And this might be a little bit alarming because we all say that we're really stressed out. If we just had some time to relax, if we just had some time to sit back and take a moment, we'd feel much better. But we don't seem to do that. So the question becomes, how much do we resist stopping and thinking? Do we really hate stopping and thinking that much? So an experiment was done by Tim Wilson and some colleagues, and they took college students and they brought them into a lab and they said, please entertain yourselves with your thoughts for a few minutes. And they took them in a room with just a chair, and people were invited to sit and entertain themselves with their thoughts. They ran a bunch of trials, so anywhere from 6 to 15 minutes, they were asked to entertain themselves with their thoughts. Do you think they enjoyed it? I see some heads shaking. 58% said they found it difficult to concentrate. Now, this is a little bit weird because they weren't actually asked to concentrate on anything. But they said, well, my mind keeps wandering. Well, wasn't that the point? Your mind was supposed to wander. And 50% said they did not enjoy the experience. It wasn't that they were just neutral, they just did not enjoy it. So we need some follow-up studies on this. If you're like me, maybe you were saying, oh, it's these college students these days, they're so tied to their smartphones. So they ran the experiment in the community. They found the same exact findings. Age didn't matter, smartphone use didn't matter. People just didn't want to sit and think. So, part 2 of the study. Can we figure out whether people really don't want to think? Let's give them an alternative. You can be alone with your thoughts or give yourself an electric shock. No, we can't. There's some ethical issues here, right? This was a very mild electric shock similar to static electricity. So there was a device that in the first part of the study, they would ask people to hold the device. It would give them a brief shock, and people identified it as unpleasant. They didn't like being shocked. And they said that they would hypothetically pay to avoid it in the future. Great, so we have a baseline now. Part 2, those same participants are asked to, here's this chair in a room, please sit and be alone with your thoughts, entertain yourselves, and on the table next to them, we're gonna put this shock device. You could pick it up again if you want to, but please just entertain yourselves with your thoughts. Why am I telling you this? You can probably guess. 43% of participants, rather than just being alone with their thoughts, decided to shock themselves. Again, age didn't seem to matter. Equal opportunity idiots we are. if you really want to differentiate who are bigger idiots, in the sample, only 25% of women decided to shock themselves. Means 2 out of 3 males are like, all right, let me do it. So I draw no conclusions from that. So what do we do with this evidence? Apparently we like to just do things, right? Here's a tempting screenshot that I pulled off the internet, 10 things you should never Google. By looking at that, you're like, what are these things? Can I Google them now? I don't know, I didn't look it up. The point is, we don't want to do these things. We don't want to shock ourselves. We don't have to do these things, but if they're available in the present moment, maybe we choose to do them. And they end up making us feel worse. They end up making us feel more productive. We've all been down that Google rabbit hole where we're like, what did I just do with the last hour? How can I get that back? So here's where we have to wonder, like, what am I telling you? Am I telling you to just do nothing? Should you just opt out? And so I can't necessarily answer that question for you, but maybe we can get some wisdom from some video clips, which I am not adept enough to know how to work. Bear with me. All right, so should we do less? Here's an example.
I'm gonna be your instincts. Kunu will be your instincts. Don't do anything. Don't try to surf. Don't do it. The less you do, the more you do. Let's see it pop up. Pop it up. That's not it at all. Do less, get down. Try less, do it again. Pop up. Nope, too slow, do less. Pop up. Pop up. You're doing too much, do less. Pop down. Pop up now. Stop, get down there. Remember, don't do anything. Nothing, pop up. Well, you gotta do more than that, because you're just laying, that looks like you're boogie boarding. Just do it, feel it, pop up. Yeah, that wasn't quite it, but we're gonna figure it out there. Let's go surfing, come on. Everybody's learning how. Come on, the weather out.
Okay, I'm sure we all learned a lot from that. So doing less might be an ideal, but we might need some help knowing how to do less. So here's our mantra: do less, but do maybe more of the right things. We could take another lesson from a fictional world, Bartleby the Scrivener, a novella by Herman Melville that I read back in high school, I'm pretty sure. Bartleby is an employee at a law firm back in the day when I believe scriveners were just copyists. They would rewrite legal documents before copy machines. So one day Bartleby decides, well, this job is pretty boring. I'm just going to respond to all job requests with, I would prefer not to. Here, Bartleby, please copy this paper for me. I would prefer not to. Hey, Bartleby, will you do this other task? I would prefer not to. He even preferred not to leave the office. He started sleeping at the office. So the business owner, as any business owner would do, without knowing how to get rid of Bartleby, decided to move his office and just left. So Bartleby was left in this office. It doesn't end well for Bartleby. He ends up poor and alone and dying of hunger. And, well, why did I bring this up again? So it's a cautionary tale of doing less is not necessarily the ideal. We want to do less of the distracting tasks, but maybe more fulfilling tasks. So a modern version of Bartleby, if any of you have seen the movie Office Space, there's a character, Peter, who, again, is unhappy in his job, and he just decides he would rather do nothing than do his job. So let's see if we can watch a movie clip with Peter. Nope. Oh, no. I'm sorry.
So, where do you work, Peter?
In a tech.
And yeah, what do you do there?
I sit in a cubicle and I update bank software for the 2000 switch.
What's that?
Well, what was
Well,
the
see, they
worst
wrote all this
faculty
bank
invited lecture
software,
ever?
and,
Well, Zajack's probably.
To save space, they use 2 digits for the date instead of...
I'll get there eventually. Do less, Zajack.
So, where do you work, Peter?
In a tech.
And yeah, what do you do there?
I sit in a cubicle and I update bank software for the 2000 switch.
What's that?
Well, see, they wrote all this bank software, and to save space, they use 2 digits for the date instead of 4, so like 98 instead of 1998. So I go through these thousands of lines of code, and it doesn't really matter. I don't like my job, and I don't think I'm gonna go anymore.
You're just not gonna go?
Yeah,
Won't you get fired?
I don't know. But I really don't like it, and I'm not gonna go.
So you're gonna quit?
Nuh-uh, not really. I'm just gonna stop going.
When did you decide all of that?
About an hour ago.
Really?
Yeah.
An hour ago. So you gonna get another job?
I don't think I'd like another job.
Well, what are you gonna do about money and bills and...
You know, I've never really liked paying bills. I don't think I'm gonna do that either.
Well, so what do you want to do?
I want to take you out to dinner. And then I want to go back to my apartment and watch Kung Fu. Do you ever watch Kung Fu?
I love Kung Fu.
Channel 39.
Totally.
You should come over and watch Kung Fu tonight.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. Can we order lunch first?
All right, so here I think we have an example of someone who's found what they want to do. It may not be that practical, and it may be very divorced from what they maybe should do. And our earlier example is, what we actually do. Sometimes we actually do things that aren't aligned with what we should do or what we want to do. So what's our ideal? We should have these circles overlap. We should have what we should do, when possible, align with what we want to do. And what we want to do should be what we actually do. So how can we do this? And how can we maybe resist some of the temptations that would drive these circles apart? So there are some motivators that easily hijack our attention. When we have the prospect for making a lot of money, if we have the prospect of fame or status or image, these sort of motivators can steer our attention pretty easily. In the business, we describe these as extrinsic motivators, things outside of your internal motivations that are drawing your interest. So as you can see the list up there, you have money, it could be grades, it could be external motivators that are going to drive what we're doing. So are these things bad? They're not necessarily bad, but we might need to balance them with some other things. And they can be problematic for our prediction of the future. So when we are predicting what's going to make us happy, we tend to gravitate toward these extrinsic motivators, and they may not actually have as big an effect as we think they'll have. By the joy of acquiring things is pretty fleeting, and there seems to be a tipping point. We acquire so much, we think we want more, and it doesn't really seem to have a huge effect. So we can look for some evidence. We can look to a famous study by Kahneman and Deaton from 2010 that looked at how happy people are relative to their measure of income. So on the bottom of this graph, the x-axis is family income. And you can see that bottom line describes stress and well-being. So little green arrow shows they found at the $75,000 mark, people's lives don't become more stress-free. Their sense of well-being doesn't change. And you can even see that that line flattens out well before $75,000 a year. So basically, we need enough money to get us out of poverty so that we don't have to worry about money anymore. And then money seems to add very little to our day-to-day happiness. I left the other line on there. That's the latter line, describes life satisfaction. Money does come in handy for life satisfaction because people don't generally know how to answer the question, how satisfied I am with my life. So they wonder, how satisfied am I? Well, I make a lot of money. I must be really satisfied. So they quickly come up with an answer and rationalize, okay, it must be money that's making me happy. But that day-to-day stress-free line means that we can have a lot of well-being without a lot of money. Some people wanted to see a regional breakdown of this, so you can break this down regionally and say, okay, the $75,000 average is different per area of the country. So in Nebraska, that $75,000 per cost of living is closer to about $65,000, where more money doesn't make us any happier. So you can see regional differences. What are some other extrinsic motivators that affect us? The stress of achieving an extrinsic motivator. The stress of achieving a grade seems to add a lot of stress to people's lives. So when you're measuring success, if you're measuring success with extrinsic measures, that becomes a more stressful existence than measuring success via intrinsic motives and achieving intrinsic motives. So if you're measuring things via short-term outcomes, just comparison to others, well, I did well on this test, but I heard someone else did better, that makes it difficult to be happy. We're constantly worried about the approval of others. So we can look at specific academic studies where students were studied relative to how important was it that they achieved certain grades, and students under stressful conditions where grades were identified as extremely important experienced more depressive symptoms. So we can see some perils of extrinsic motivation. Intrinsically motivated students are less dependent on these contingent rewards. So what is the alternative to extrinsic motivators? Intrinsic motivators like being motivated by personal growth and development, building relationships with others, and contributing to a community. So you can see how rather than, okay, I need to do well in this class to achieve a grade, versus I need to do well in this class to grow and learn, and maybe I'll use this knowledge later. That's a much more forgiving way to go about things, and people can achieve just as high a level. So when we want to look at some data, we want to find out from people, when you identify that extrinsic motivators are important, how does that affect your well-being versus people who identify intrinsic motivators as important? So if we're giving you a survey about extrinsic aspirations, if you agree with, I hope to have a lot of expensive possessions, my name will be known by many people, I will achieve the look I've been after, those are extrinsic aspirations. We want to track if people identify those and see what the effect is. So the opposite aspirations would be intrinsic aspirations. So people will know and accept who I really am. I will have good friends that I can count on. I will help others improve their lives. Intrinsic aspirations. So people may identify those intrinsic aspirations. So the finding of this study, those who identified more extrinsic aspirations had lower levels of well-being to start with. Maybe they were unhappy, so they were looking for extrinsic motivators to make them happy. Oh, if I only achieve this, if people only think this about me, then I can be happy. The effect of actually attaining those aspirations was also studied. So this is a cool study because they looked at a bunch of college students from a small Midwestern college. You know, maybe that sounds familiar, maybe that sounds relevant. And they asked them to identify their aspirations, and then they tracked them over 2 years. So following them 2 years after graduation, those who attained their extrinsic aspirations, like making a lot of money or achieving the look that you've always wanted, it had zero effect on well-being whatsoever. The intrinsic aspiration attainment had a large effect on people's well-being, a large effect on happiness. And so the effect size for this was 0.77 for those of you who care about stats and effect sizes. That's a huge effect size in psychology. That means there's a huge relationship between attaining intrinsic things and well-being and zero relationship between attaining these extrinsic desires and well-being. So the advice would be, okay, it's not bad to have extrinsic aspirations, but maybe we should focus on these intrinsic aspirations. So really, can we turn some of those have-tos, I have to get a good grade, into want-tos? Can we focus on growing and learning? Can we focus on shared experience? Can we focus on helping those around me? So we'd all love to do this, but there are probably barriers to that. What gets in the way? Bad bosses, maybe, get in the way. Many of you have probably had a job where your boss took a controlling approach, took a micromanaging approach. And when that happens, guess what it does to your intrinsic motivation? It rips it away completely. When someone proposes, do this or else you'll get punished, or do this and you'll be rewarded, well, that thwarts your intrinsic motivation to do it in the first place. Maybe you would have enjoyed taking on this project with a deadline that was a great opportunity to work hard and achieve something. But with that controlling approach, you get thwarted. So instead, people who experience this control tend to just be motivated to avoid failure. I don't want to get hassled, so I'll do what I have to do so that this boss doesn't threaten to punish me. So what we see, higher levels of stress. When you have a controlling manager, you perform a little bit worse on creativity tasks as well. That higher level of stress impedes your higher level cognitive thinking. So do you want a creativity test? How creative are people feeling right now? You're probably not that stressed. Are you? Are you stressed? Yeah, you're stressed. Well, I attached electrodes to everyone's chair. So if you get these wrong, then you're going to be shocked. So that would decrease performance. So this is a typical creativity task. You give people 3 words, and they have to identify a word that goes with these words. So when people are relaxed, they say clear, eye, broken, and they come up with glass. Very good. You win nothing, because extrinsic motivators are bad. I'm not giving prizes. You should feel proud of your accomplishment. Next one, coin, quick, spoon. Silver, excellent. Last one, salt, deep, foam. C, very good. See, we're all winners here. Give yourselves a round of applause. So how do we decrease a controlling approach? Maybe we create fewer rules where you must do this in order to get a certain reward, and we just give more opportunities for people to have some choice. So what if I created a rule, no high fives in the chapel? Look at your neighbor. I hear him already, right? Nobody was high-fiving. Nobody had a desire to high-five, but by creating a rule, we're going to react to it. We're going to be like, well, I kind of want a high-five. What about fist bumps? Fist bumps okay? You suddenly have this desire to break that rule. That's called reactance, and that's what control does. So organizations that give more choice, they seem to do okay. Google, have people heard of Google? Google, I think it's called? Yeah. A lot of people have heard of Google, and they have something called 20% time, where all of their employees can use a fifth of their time, 1 day every 5 days, to work on a project that they want to work on. Now, it doesn't operate as a rule. You don't actually have to do that. If you're busy with your real job, you don't have to work on that extra project, but you have the opportunity to do so. And so little inventions like Gmail and AdSense came out of that. AdSense is Google's management of ads, and it brings in, I think, $15 billion of revenue every year. So they're getting a return on investment. They're giving employees time to work on cool projects, and that they're seeing benefits to that. So these sort of strategies for management turn out to work really well. People can tap into their intrinsic motivation and achieve good things. So another way to describe this is thinking about outcome versus process. Are you focused on just success as an external outcome, or are you focused on the process? So outcome-focused approach might be, did I fail? How did everyone else do? Process-focused approach is, did I learn? Did I accomplish what I hoped to? And maybe I need to try again. So we would ask, is it okay to fail? If we're just thinking about extrinsic judgments, then it's not okay to fail. But with intrinsic motivators, maybe it's okay to fail every now and then. We're taking some risks. We're thinking about process versus outcome. And, I'm a huge fan of Spanx. So, no, I don't think I am, but I've heard of Spanx. There was a book by Friedman who talked about innovators in the workplace, and Sarah Blakely was interviewed, and she described that when she and her brother would come home from school every day, their father would ask, "What did you fail at today?" That sort of approach, that sort of open-ended approach being, you need to try some things in order to test your limits. And if you fail, that's okay. Maybe you'll learn a lot more via failure than you would have if you just played it safe. So maybe you think, the wisdom should come from Sarah Blakely. Maybe you think Michael Scott is going to provide you more wisdom. Quoting Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky may have never said that, sometimes attributed to Michael Jordan, who knows? Michael Scott's never been wrong before, let's go with him. So, we want to take big swings, but I'm not telling you to run out and fail as much as you can. You also want to have a plan B. You want to think about, let me take some risks, but let me have a plan B. There's a great study of 5,000 entrepreneurs that looked at entrepreneurs who either kept their day job while they were starting their business or quit their day job. And those who kept their day job did much better than those who quit their day job. Now, we can prospect of theories why, but it seems like having a calculated risk, were free to take chances in their new business because they had plan B. They maybe were able to take more risks. People talk about dropping out of college. Should you even go to college? Citing Mark Zuckerberg, citing Bill Gates. They actually both took a very conservative approach to dropping out of college. Bill Gates, even after he had had a lot of success, applied for a leave of absence before he left Harvard. So just in case things didn't work out, he could go back. Things worked out. Same thing with Mark Zuckerberg. So what I'm saying is we're always making bets on the future. Every choice that we make makes a bet about the future. So what are the circumstances that should affect how we make these bets? If you really want to get nerdy, we could look at the difference between risk and uncertainty. Risk is essentially in a closed set of information, we can assess risk accurately. So blackjack. How many of you, know a system for playing blackjack? Maybe not many of you, but all of you could learn a system for playing blackjack in an optimal way and increasing your chance of winning. Because there are no unknowns in blackjack. There's randomness, but there's a specific deck of cards and specific probabilities that we can say. If the dealer has a 7 showing and we have 2 10s, should we split? We can say with probability, yes, I don't know, I don't play blackjack. But we could say confidently. Whereas, and we could come up with an optimized model. But in conditions of uncertainty, we might need some shortcuts. We can't know all the variables. As much as I'd love to have a model for everything, we can't know every variable, so that's where heuristics come in. Just a fancy word used by decision-making researchers about shortcuts we use for decision-making. So what I'm gonna try to do is give you some practical shortcuts to make some choices efficiently. So let's look at research on heuristics. If you can pick out one clever cue that can guide behavior, then that is going to make your decision-making very efficient. You only need to know one thing. Turns out we use that on a daily basis without even knowing it. So if any of you have ever, caught a fly ball in a baseball game, when a player runs to catch a fly ball, what they're doing, and they don't even realize it, is keeping a constant visual angle between them and the ball. So as the ball falls, they run to get closer, that visual angle stays the same. So this study was found, for a long time, no one had really studied that. Do people run as fast as they can to where they predict the ball's gonna fall? No, they can use this one cue and they don't have to calculate any trajectories. I don't want to blow your mind with these special effects, but here we go. This is the gaze heuristic in motion. Look at that. Oh my gosh, we can run it again. This is amazing. So when things work in PowerPoint, I'm good, but YouTube scares me. So we have our gaze heuristic. We have one rule we can follow. And so does this work in other settings? We'll stay in the sports world. Can you predict outcomes in the Wimbledon tennis tournament with one clever cue? So some researchers went out and surveyed amateur recreational tennis players and just gave them a list of the people competing in Wimbledon and asked them, which names do you recognize? So you survey a couple hundred people, you get them to assess which names they recognize. Almost everybody recognizes Federer and Serena Williams. And almost nobody recognizes the lists at the bottom of the draw. Then you use that to rank people and predict the winners. So what do we get? We get that name recognition out-predicted these other expert opinions, the tournament seeding, the various ranks of the ATP. So you can narrow down just one cue based on people's judgment and predict the future. So maybe we can just take the best information and make predictions that will be relevant for our world. And we don't need all of the information in order to make a good prediction. Because in the messy world, we're never going to get all the information we would want. And so I'm looking at this heuristic research, and I'm wondering, how can I test this? So you knew this was coming. Predict football games. How can I narrow down things, all the information that's out there in the sports world to predict a football game and figure out an efficient way to predict it? So I've done this in the past, and I tried to collect every possible piece of information about football teams. Passing yards, passing defense, interceptions thrown, interceptions caught, penalty yards, home field advantage, pile it all into a model, and you can predict, but you can't predict that accurately. So is there a better way? Is there a more efficient way? Is there a less is more way? So I decided to test two clever cues, two cues that might be shortcuts for predicting NFL team performance. One is the Vegas line. Every game gets a spread. Can we turn that into a probability? And then another statistical measure of how strong that team is. So Vegas spread is kind of public opinion and maybe a little bit of casino guess, and then we use statistics. So as an example, I just have two numbers to average. I don't need a big spreadsheet like the last model. And I can say, okay, last night the Patriots were favored by 10 points over the Indianapolis Colts. That translated to about a 78% chance of them winning. Then, according to statistics, the Patriots aren't quite as strong as the Vegas line indicated. 73%, let's average those together. We get 75%. That's our prediction. So how do we test how accurate this is? Well, as I'm thinking about this way to test it, the website 538, which is owned by ESPN, was sponsoring a contest. So can you beat their statistical forecasts of NFL games? So you make a prediction for every game, and they track it for you. So I figured this would be an easy way to study it. So all season last year, entered my rankings, and this system came in 60th. Is that any good? There are 20,000 entries. So I guess it's okay, right? The 538 system came in 432nd, so again, did really well. Basically beat a lot of people's intuitive predictions, or if they were using statistics as well, their other statistical predictions. So by boiling down the model to just two things, it became much more efficient at predicting the future. So I'm tracking it this year as well. I'll throw up the stats for this year. There are only 10,000 entries. A lot of people have given up on predicting the NFL. The model this year is 173rd. 538's model is 909th. This is, in case anybody wants to go out there and Google it, this is this contest you can enter now, but this contest is available. You can see the rankings online. So it seems like heuristics are working. So what do we do with this model? Well, do we take it to Vegas, make a lot of money, get some plastic surgery, fulfill extrinsic motivators? I'll be right back. No. We don't do that. We don't think that's going to make us happy. I don't know who us is. Us. Make my family happy. Instead, maybe we can use it for learning. Maybe we can use it as an example in classes. Maybe we can find out other ways to apply this. So that's not the most practical application of this model for your lives. NFL games are pretty trivial. What are some other ways that heuristics are used that are really, really valuable, more valuable than predicting NFL games? And so we can think of expert checklists as a heuristic. When aviators do their pre-flight check, they go through a list of hundreds of items. They're experts. Do they really need a checklist? Well, yes. The capacity of our memory, why would we want them using their brains to think about all the things I need to do to make this flight safe? We'd rather have them use a checklist. And the other benefit of the checklist is that it gets cockpit crews to act like a team. It gets them communicating, so you're not afraid to question the captain. So we can see a 57% decrease since 2005 in accident rates. It's not just the checklist, but that's part of it. Flying is really safe. Healthcare. These have been employed. Surgical checklists have been employed. So if anyone has had a procedure done, the surgical team may ask you to identify yourself. What's your name? What are you in for? That's not the word. They don't use those words. And they also identify themselves. And so everyone knows each other's names before they put you under. So the team develops that ability to question each other, ability to comment on what each other are doing, so they can avoid problems. And we see a huge reduction in surgical deaths. Interestingly, when these are implemented, when checklists are implemented poorly in a controlling way, there's zero effect on patient deaths. When it becomes an order from administration, you must use this checklist, and people aren't allowed to customize them, it has no effect on whether people die or not. So you have evidence that these things are valuable. So what should we be doing? Time to hurry to the end, right? Maybe we should make fewer decisions per day. We should avoid decision fatigue. If we have a few decisions that are really important, we shouldn't be making all the other decisions that don't really matter. In stock market analysts, as they went through the day, their forecasts got worse. So how can we employ this? I employ it like so, every now and then. But this went under the radar for 8 years. I would wear a blue shirt like every day because I didn't want to think about what I was wearing. And then one day, Becca's in the back of the room. She raised her hand. She's like, Zajack, do you wear a blue shirt every day? I'm like, damn it. I've been unmasked. But so find something that doesn't matter to you and just make it default. Wear a blue shirt. Eat the same thing for lunch every day. Stress. What do we do in the face of stress? I run away. I exercise, right? Exercise is a good approach to stressful conditions. Maybe you run away and find a solution for your stress. Maybe you run away and your brain is now ready to solve the problem. Maybe you just have a little break and then you are under stress again. But it's not a bad solution. How many of you didn't get enough sleep last night? Raise your hand. All right, look around. Yeah, so this is an American phenomenon. We don't get enough sleep. Is sleep valuable? I'm not going to read all this stuff, but this is what sleep does for you. Everything good. If we could sell a pill that did all this stuff, we'd be millionaires, right? But it's just sleep. And we tend to prioritize things over sleep that we shouldn't be prioritizing over sleep. All right. The last thing I'll say is less working when we're not working. Find those times when you are at work and be at work. So studies of people who checked a lot of messages when they weren't at work, for students when you're like kind of half into doing something and half out doing something else. Employees experienced more burnout when they were checking messages more often, when they didn't disconnect from work. Employees who did disconnect, who didn't check messages at night, didn't send emails at 10 p.m., greater engagement during work hours. They were happier at work when they were at work. So find ways to segment your life a little bit. So the final lesson is really just take the time to stop and think, what are my motivations? What do I want to be doing on a daily basis? But that's bad advice because we hate to stop and think. We established that at the beginning. I sit and be alone with your thoughts. You hate that. So instead, what can we do? We can use heuristics. So maybe you have a daily checklist and it says general things like, okay, intrinsic motivators. I want to feed my curiosity. I want to find a way to connect with people. I want to make things a little better for others. Or maybe yours is more specific, like mine. Go for a run. Go to bed at 10. Wear a blue shirt. And do less, but do it better. So essentially, the less we do of the things that don't matter, the more we do of the things that matter. Thanks.